Sometimes I feel like the guy down in the corner of this picture. I'm scratching my head and I'm thinking, what's going on with our universities? Tuition is skyrocketing. The feds are slashing money for science research. The humanities always seem to be in crisis. And just last year we had the MOOC craze. Massive open online courses taught by rock star professors to tens, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of students that some say are going to put poor schlubs like us out of business. Now, these are unsettling times for higher education, and I, for one, am seeking some kind of reassurance. It's natural to seek that reassurance in the idea that universities are bastions of tradition. We like to think that the universities of today are direct continuations of universities from centuries ago. The caps and gowns, the grassy quadrangles, the lovably absent-minded professors, even those students we saw sleeping in lecture back in the 1300s in Professor Bayless's talk. These all seem to suggest that stability and tradition will preserve university life even as disruptive change happens all around us. But I'm here to say that's not true. In its nearly 9 centuries of existence, the university has hardly proved to be a bastion of hallowed traditions or reassuring stability. Instead, it's been more like a reusable shell that's been emptied and refilled to fit new needs and aspirations. Instead of continuity, what we see are waves of change I call reinventions. Reinventions are changes to the basic mission of higher learning and to the institutional form that mission takes. And we ought to take more comfort from the idea that our mission is always changing than we should from the misplaced belief that it will always be the same. Now, in their original form, dating back to the 1100s and the Middle Ages, universities were hardly more than academic guilds. Like craftspeople's guilds, they came complete with masters and journeymen, or masters and bachelors, as they were then called. They were all men and boys, it's worth noting. Now, one of the things that these universities did was to provide concrete benefits for their members. They did not, however, cover all knowledge. They were not universal, as the word university might imply. If you want to think about their mission, probably the best cognate word is the word union. Some of the concrete benefits they provide were much like unions. They provide protection. They provide tax benefits. They provide rent controls. They existed in part to keep hostile, often violent townspeople from attacking scholars in robes like you see here. Universities were not configured to do academic research. They hardly enjoyed the principle of academic freedom. And they served mainly to train lawyers, doctors, and particularly preachers for a growing economy. Because in those days, having people to communicate God's word to the masses was the most important thing. Focused as they were on practical career preparation, early universities tended to gravitate to methods and texts inherited from the Greeks and from the Romans and from the study of the Bible. Promoting curiosity and discovery for their own sake were hardly part of their mission, and for hundreds of years that worked just fine. Now, this type of university learning was upended by a series of upheavals between 1500 and 1750. Voyages to new continents like our own, together with microscopes, telescopes, and other scientific instruments, these innovations tended to come from people working largely outside the university world. European explorers and inventors brought back new artifacts and developed new techniques largely unknown to the ancients or to the medievals who continued on those ancient traditions. Their reinvention of what was known therefore came as a profound shock to scholars working in the more conservative university world. Science and discovery instead thrived more among groups of independent amateur gentlemen like those seen here. Even women and children sometimes got involved, if only as spectators to scientific experiments. If you look up here, you see a live bird being placed in a glass bulb from which all the air is gradually being sucked out so that the bird will suffocate and die. Now, the Greeks had said nature abhors a vacuum, that empty space could not exist. This type of experiment showed, to the horror of some of the spectators, that ancient maxim was not in fact true. Dozens of ancient nostrums were disproven in this way during the scientific revolution. And the point, again, is that the curiosity that drove these types of innovations could not be contained within the stone walls of Oxford or of Cambridge. Indeed, the greatest technology of the age, the printing press, made knowledge available to any curious reader, whether or not they happened to belong to an academic guild called university. A lot of people back then thought universities were just becoming intellectual backwaters full of pedantic professors and alcoholic students. Some even prophesied that universities would wither away as the printing press spread knowledge to the masses. And a few hardy startup entrepreneurs like that self-educated print shop apprentice named Benjamin Franklin even seemed to suggest that dream might become a reality. The printing press, the knowledge it spread, that was the IT revolution of the 18th century. And just as we invest a lot of utopian hopes today in that idea that the internet will make knowledge available to all in a democratic way, that was the hope that arose at the end of the 1700s. But in a very surprising reinvention about this time, in the sleepy universities of small-town Germany, in the crusty old humanities rather than the exciting new sciences, and among the unlikeliest of people, evangelical Protestants, something new called the Research University was born. Now, these evangelical Protestants were more committed to reading and rereading their Bibles than they were to surfing through mounds of printed materials. So they formed seminaries, what we today call seminars, to gather small groups of university scholars together to pore over biblical texts. Researching ancient languages and puzzling through discrepancies in those ancient texts was the best way they thought to truly master the Bible and other classics, and even to generate new knowledge about them. Discipline was what seminars offered, not just in the field of religion, but as the model spread sort of spontaneously to history and philosophy and classics and every other discipline as well. That's why we call the disciplines disciplines. That's what they gave you. Put yourself in the shoes of this poor student in late 18th century Tübingen, a university in Germany, undergoing an oral exam. You hoped and prayed that an angel would whisper the right answer into your ear. But let's skip ahead to the mid-1800s. In a more secular age, as you can tell by the change in men's fashion. After it's all over, assuming it all went well, you could relax, you could wipe your brow, you could exhale, you could sit back and let the backslapping begin. These seminars were academic pressure cookers. It was a way of taking a young man's mind and disciplining it in a way that went beyond just merely awakening his curiosity. Ambition and fear, competition and camaraderie, these were the emotional ingredients of the 19th century research university. Because if you're going to pressure someone to create new knowledge and just not rest upon the old, you need that kind of emotional energy. At the time, it was also an all-man's world again. Part of what made this whole thing tick was the pressure among young men to outdo each other and to impress the old man who tended to run the seminar and preside over the whole thing. That's one of the key reinventions of knowledge we see with the 19th century research university. You can see some of that masculine swagger here as well. You're looking at a picture of one of the very first, if not the very first, university science laboratories, based, again, not among amateur gentlemen, but among university scholars themselves. This is in tiny Gießen, Germany, the lab of a now all but unknown chemist named Justus Liebig, who gathered together a bunch of young gentlemen to try to prove that the chemicals you find in your own body or in any other living thing, a zebrafish, for example, obey the same natural laws and principles as inorganic matter. So if you want to know where the physics of life began, or at least in this case, the chemistry of life, look no further than Liebig's lab. And Raghu has told me that they still wear top hats in his own laboratory. Not true. Things actually changed pretty quickly, as you can see here, but laboratories like these in the early 20th centuries were direct lineal descendants, in some cases, of Liebig's laboratory. And together what they did was to secure a place for the sciences as well as the humanities, and as you can see here, even a few women working alongside men at these research universities. The point, however, is for a long time, these places remained sanctuaries of a tiny academic elite. But that, too, was about to change as universities were again reinvented in this country after World War II. Students coming home on the GI Bill, like those shown here, were just the first wave of several generations of Americans who collectively swelled the size of American higher education to a scale absolutely unprecedented throughout the rest of human history. We live as a result in a new age, the age of the mass university. Now, I said just a couple seconds ago that this might be considered a reinvention of knowledge. I'm not actually sure we can say that yet. After all, by the standards of prior reinventions of knowledge, this picture was taken yesterday, about 50, 60 years ago. It takes a long time to reinvent the ways we produce and transmit knowledge. And when I look around at the way we do lectures and seminars and laboratories today, I can't say yet that we've changed all that much from the early research university. The main thing that's changed is we've got a lot more students to process through the system. In fact, this massive influx of students into an increasingly anonymous mass university has produced more than a few hiccups along the way. You see here a picture that dates from the 1960s. It's an oft-forgotten fact that the 60s-era student protests for civil rights and against the Vietnam War often made the computer a symbol of all that was wrong with the system. We think of the computer today as an agent of liberation, but back then it was quite often seen as an enforcer of oppression or even alienation to those students filing to the mass university. This is a not-so-subtle commentary on the way they thought things were running. Up at the top you see some corporate boards of trustees pulling the strings of the university president, pulling the strings of a couple of school marms. And out at the bottom here, there's this factory, and there's a bunch of punch cards on legs. Now, what's going on there? Used to be that if you wanted to register for classes at a university, you had to carry around one of these punch cards, and the holes in the card would sort of tell the computer if you're going to register for chemistry or English or whatever. And, more often than not, you get there, wait in line, and stick the card into the computer, and the darn thing would mangle it and spit it back out. So students took to wearing these cards around their necks, saying, "Do not bend, fold, spindle, or mutilate me," just like happened to my punch card. It gives you a sense of how it felt to live and to work and to study in one of these mass universities. Now, students today, you can see here, a lot less rebellious. They've got their hands on their hearts. They're taking the Pledge of Allegiance. The punch cards, thank goodness, are long gone. And computers, rather than promoting regimentation and standardization, are promoting personalization and imagination. They connect people in networks and not in hierarchies like we saw in the last slide. As we'll see in our next talk by a Facebook executive, there are people working to this day to create new ways that computers forge those human connections in a way that folks back in the 60s hardly could even imagine. Now, as we look around at this landscape of higher education, I want to leave you with two thoughts as an historian. First of all, I said at the beginning of my talk that massive online courses might put us out of business. I'm actually not worried about that. I think when the dust settles, there are going to be places called universities that people will still go to. History shows that folks will always want to congregate physically in pursuit of learning. That's why the printing press, for all it did to democratize and spread knowledge, was followed by seminars and laboratories that reinvented face-to-face learning for a new age. Second point, however, history never repeats itself. That's what I mean when I talk about reinventions. We cannot rely on tradition. We cannot expect it to continue. We cannot expect things to be reinvented in a way that's comfortable for us. We live in absolutely unprecedented times. Technology, in particular, forces us to ask a question we've never even had reason to ask before. Why do we need people in the first place? Okay? We've got to figure that out, and only once we do can we then redesign our technology to support and to reinvent teaching, learning, research, and discovery for the specific challenges of the mass university. I don't know the answer, nobody does, but I'm going to bet that we're going to have to cut costs and create connections among real human people in a way we've never had to before. So let's set aside all the hype around the killer app or the next big thing. Let's set aside a lot of the fear that Twitter is killing Western civilization 140 characters at a time. We spend so much time focused on the last 15 years of technological change that we forget the last 50 years of a much bigger story. That's the story of the American Mass University. That's the institution that took my father out of Appalachian poverty and lifted him up to give him an MD so that he could then write a check to send me to Harvard when I got in. That is an institution unprecedented in the history of the world, and it's under profound stress today. So we've got a lot of work to do still to reinvent the shell that we have inherited from history. But this is the reassuring thing for me. We've already got our marching orders from history. We know what we have to do, but we have to summon every ounce of creativity to do it better. We are smack dab in the middle of a great reinvention of knowledge connected to the promise of American democracy, and that's the adventure going forward. I look forward to that, and I look forward to working with many of you to achieve that. Thanks very much.